So next up, podcast listeners, are we importing the entitled? I mean, we're talking about in this podcast, let freedom ring. And yet this story came out about the United States bringing in Afghanis from Afghanistan and not properly vetting them. We've heard this and we've asked millions of questions. The press has, are you vetting them? If so, how? And then we have this story that has come up about an Afghan refugee who's complaining about the food that he's receiving from the United States while being detained. Of course, he's not yet in the country, but during the detention, he's not in Afghanistan either. I think he's overseas in one of our military bases. And in the meantime, obviously, what ends up happening? Well, we have to feed them, clothe them, provide them health care, provide them facilities to live in, facilities to shower in. I mean, it's going to cost us a fortune. It already is. And my question is, are we importing the entitled? Because an Afghan refugee has tweeted about the food that he has received, and he's not happy about it. So, providing the adage, this is in the Western Journal, providing the adage that no good deed goes unpunished, a refugee from impoverished, war-torn Afghanistan whined via his taxpayer-funded iPhone and Wi-Fi service that the free food he's being served at a Texas facility isn't up to his grandiose standards. So he's being provided, apparently, not just the food and so forth, but an iPhone and Wi-Fi service by the United States taxpayers. Quote, not complaining, but this is what I got last night for dinner. And the next meal is 12 hours later, Hamed Amhadi tweeted Thursday from Fort Bliss. Quote, refugee life might be safe, but never easy and favorable. This is what this idiot said in a tweet. I mean, he's an Afghan refugee, and he's being taken care of by the American taxpayers, and he's complaining about his circumstances, about the free food that he's getting. Amadi disdainfully posted a photo of a tray of food that appeared to contain fish, fruit, and 2 slices of toasted bread. So here's the tweet. Hamed Hamadi, not complaining, but this is what I got last night for dinner. And the next meal is 12 hours later. Refugee life might be safe, but never easy and favorable. Fort Bliss, El Paso, Texas. So this guy is in Fort Bliss, El Paso, Texas. That's where he's being held, presumably while he's not just being vetted at the same time, hopefully, but also determining where they're going to put him. Because once these Afghan refugees are released from not just El Paso, Texas, at Fort Bliss, but elsewhere, where do you put them? Where do you resettle them? Who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay for their rent and their daily expenses? I mean, they're not going to just like show up in a community and be able to pay rent and find an apartment. I mean, we're going to pay for that. And for how long? And he's complaining about his food. For reference, Afghanistan is one of the poorest countries in the world, where 47.3% of the population lives below the poverty level. Presumably, many of them would gladly consume the meal that Hamadi criticized. Later Thursday, Hamadi spoke to KTSM TV in El Paso, Texas, where he continued to complain that life in America wasn't living up to his lofty expectations. Quote, so the situation here is not as good as we expected. I had the problem with the situation here is that the U.S. government was not really prepared, he said. It's true, thanks to President Joe Biden's chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, the United States was not prepared to handle the unprecedented barrage of unvetted Afghan refugees flooding the country. Last week, the Biden administration said the goal was to take in 50,000 refugees from Afghanistan. This is on top of the up to 2 million illegal aliens from Central America who have flooded the United States by September, and I'm quite certain not a single one of them is vaccinated, or very, very few are actually vaccinated. So there is another cost just on top of that. So I'm reading this Twitter feed, podcast listeners, and here are some of the responses to this idiot Afghani who is so ungrateful and so entitled. So WD-40 plus is the Twitter handle. It says, "Here's more of the cost of your meal, sir." And this Twitter handle person put on Twitter pictures of a son taking the flag at his father's funeral. Mothers and their children and the wives and fathers holding the casket of an American military person who died in Afghanistan. And there are numerous pictures of that. And so then that was one of the responses. And then another is from God Saad, S-A-A-D, says, "How about thank you? Be grateful. Have some humility and exhibit some dignity. No one owes you anything. I'm a refugee from Lebanon, and I am forever grateful." And then Amy Turkanian, "I was unable to reach a homeless veteran to ask how they like their free meals and free housing because they don't get those things. Also, they don't have iPhones." And then Tim Young, "I'd be happy to pay for your ticket to go back since it's so rough here that you have to take your sandwich apart and put the bread out of the shot." So he took a picture, this Afghan refugee took a picture of his food, and he had 2 slices of bread, but he took the slices of bread out of the tray of food and shot to make it look like there was nothing there, hardly any food. And look, it's fine. He didn't like his food. There is an alternative. You can always go home. I mean, you can always go back to Afghanistan. But here's the point, podcast listeners. Here we have someone who is already complaining, and he's entitled. And these are the people the Democrat Party want in the United States. This is why they don't have to go through the regular process of becoming American citizens or becoming residents of the United States. And that's because the Democrats are trying to import the entitled. They want to import the entitled because entitled people vote Democrat. It's the whole point. And here you have this kid who's complaining. And why are we providing them iPhones? I mean, how long is that going to last? It's just ridiculous. I'm sorry. I'm not heartless in saying that we should, just send this guy back and drop him in the middle of the Taliban and so forth. But here's the point. Someone should have a conversation with him, and a come to Jesus moment or come to Muhammad moment maybe, and say to him, "You know what? If you really believe that this is not what you expected, we can send you back. And you need to be grateful to this country who's given you this opportunity, and you need to seize the opportunity of freedom and understand exactly what it means. Freedom doesn't mean you get free stuff. Freedom means you now have the opportunity to live your life as you've always wanted to and pursue the dreams that you've always wanted to pursue, and then take responsibility for it, as Herschel Walker said. And that's why we're calling this podcast Let Freedom Ring. Let freedom wing. That's right. Let freedom ring.